Automations, one of the most important features of any DAW. FL Studio is no exception. Just right click on anything and it will pop up, create an automation clip. And since multiple people ask me what can they do to improve their automation clips or what I do with my automation clips, I'm here with a long overdue video called 10 things to do with automation clips. Here we go. For the first section of the video, we're going to talk about movement, because movement is a very important key to make your track sound lively. But what do I mean with movement? I mean getting from point A to B. By removing frequencies, by changing the amount of frequencies, or just use transitional sounds or effects like risers, whooshes, and maybe some crashes. But since this is a video about automations, we're going to talk about the implications they have to use these techniques. One of my favorite ways to create movement in a track is to use a low-pass filter on a synth and automate it to slowly filter in the high end. When you do it right, it sounds something like this. In this case, I used this macro to automate the cutoff of the filter to the right here. This way I don't lose the plug sound the LFO makes, but I still can open it up very slowly. Just simply like this. Now this is a build-up, so we'll also need a high pass. Why a high pass? The high pass is just there to remove some bass in the sound, so that when the drop hits, it feels like there's more bass. We do this by just grabbing an EQ. Right click on the knob you want to automate, create automation clip, and now move it the way we want to. Just don't overdo it. When we're moving from section A to section B, it's always necessary to make sure the listener anticipates it somehow. What I used here was Fruity Paramedic EQ2's preset called Old Telephone. But instead of automating one of the knobs, I automated the mix button all the way to the right. This way the filtered sound mixes with the unprocessed sound. This creates some really interesting intros. Or a really interesting transition to the next part of the track. On the topic of making transitions impactful, taking away the width of a sound is really important. Because when you bring it back in, it's like a wow factor. This is why it's amazing to put it before drops. So what we're going to do is actually make everything mono before the drop. Or at least somewhat mono. I'm heading to this first channel, which for me is always the sidechain bus. And just automate this weird button, which is the mono and stereo button. And I will create an automation for about halfway of that build-up. Then we make a similar shape like this. Make sure it's not fully up there because, yeah, fully mono, that just sounds a bit trash. And then you'll play it. Now we're going to have a little talk about mixing. Mixing is basically giving every sound its own little room, its own little space. We do this so we have a good overview of all the sounds that are playing. And hey, if it's too much, just change the amount of frequencies you're hearing. I do this by using volume automations a lot. And with that, we're falling back to the topic of automations. Who would have guessed? Sidechain, everybody's best friend. What it does is make way for sounds by either compressing other sounds or just straight up automating the volume like we're going to do. In this case, and in probably most cases, we're going to make way for the drums by automating everything else, basically. But we're not going to automate everything individually. I've routed all my sounds through a specific chain, so they'll end up at this specific bus. And now if we add the plugin Fruity Balance to it, select the parameter where you want the automation clip to be, and then make the automation clip. Now create this shape similar like this, and you're basically done already. Just copy it over all the kick drums and everything that needs this heavy sidechain. If the drums aren't that heavy, you could just adjust this little thing here to make it less heavy. In this section we're just going to make way for a bass shot that needs to be played. But the vocal also has a lot of mid frequencies, so we're just going to cut them out using a high pass filter. Now we simply make an automation of this knob and then shape it like this, so it stops exactly when the bass shot stops playing. This way it doesn't overlap, and it works pretty good. This one's going to be just as short as the previous one. The guitar in this track sounds pretty muted. Just purely for the mid information, because that's all we need in the intro of the track. But when the drop hits, it's not enough. We need that extra clarity. So we're removing the filter from it so it can pop out in the track. There are other ways than using automation clips to automate the reverb, but you can still do it using automation clips, though I really don't recommend it. If you still decide to do it, then don't do it on vocals. Instead, use it on a lead like this. This lead is drowned in reverb, so what I like to do is cut it away sometimes to give it a different feel for variation purposes. I probably don't need to say this to most of you, but just turning on a lot of effects on something can be fun sometimes. Just try it out, it's a good way for variation and transforming sounds. In this case I used it to transform a fill to a wider sound using Shaperbox, and I automated the mix so it will just peak at the peak of the fill. Now I really wished I learned this one earlier, because the pitch bend in Serum is not that easy and straightforward as most plugins. First, you gotta set the parameters on how far you want to pitch bend. This can be done next to the keyword inside of the plugin. Then you have to click on this wheel to open up more settings, and then select the parameter again of how far you want to automate the pitch. Then you can just simply right click on that and then automate the pitch. Now you might be wondering, where's the 10th automation clip tip? Well, if you just scroll a little bit down and press subscribe, you'll automate notifications. That's it.